keep in mind that the 1960s didn't actually end in the 60s. So it's not exactly strictly chronological. So the 60s kept going through at least the first few years of the 1970s. So just to put it into perspective, I grew up in South New Jersey, but by 1972, I moved to northern New Jersey in the New York City metro vicinity. And as a result, we got a lot more of the news from New York as local news. We heard a little bit more about John Lennon because of that. So in the 1970s, the perception is that the Beatles have broken up, but they're just another band. They are not a legend. They're still just another band, and the 60s is still going on. And John Lennon and the other members of the Beatles have split up, and people are just judging their records as just normal records by normal people. Yeah, they're ex-Beatles, but again, the Beatles are just another band. And it's almost embarrassing by the mid-70s to be a Beatles fan, or even difficult. I remember that vividly from being in school, especially by the time Led Zeppelin got very popular. And it was extremely embarrassing to be a early Beatles fan, because it was just seen as pop music, not even just bubblegum kind of thing. So let's start with just John Lennon's. So by 1970, Lennon is still in London, according to Tiffany's, and he's put out the Plastic Ono Band, or the Primal Scream album. This does okay, but not a very popular record. Some of it isn't played. Some of it, I believe, isn't even allowed to play, if I'm not mistaken. Probably the God song in particular. And after that, we've got Imagine by 1970. No, I think Live in New York. Live in New York comes next?
Yes.
Which doesn't do very well at all. So
That was 70. That was
72,
72, yeah.
and it's political. Americans don't like politics in their music, at least not at this point. In the earlier 60s, folk rock was, or at least folk music was respected. And, but by the early 70s, with Nixon in charge, it became a lot more dangerous. And I think Lennon was perceived as being used by Jerry Rubin and Abby Hoffman and people of that ilk. And that's also when the move to have John Lennon deported had started. So in the news, most of what you heard about John Lennon had to do with his legal problems, about trying to stay in the country, about his visa expiring and extensions to keep renewing it, as he kept basically being supported on a lifeline of just living from one extension to another. And as a result, it didn't help his music sales very much. Imagine came out, and by the time that it came out, I think he'd already started the Lost Weekend, and had gone out to Los Angeles with Nate Pang, and was hanging around with Harry Nilsson, and a couple of other friends, and Ringo, and they started working on...
And Jones and Keith Moon. You talked about it yesterday.
And he started working on the rock and roll album, at least laying the basic tracks down with Phil Spector out on the West Coast. I remember that the scene in the nightclub where John had been thrown out after the remarks he made about Dick Smothers, and that was in the news. So again, he's not very well reported. It's not very popular. He's on the Mike Douglas show.
Yes, for a week.
And that's an unusual, if you haven't seen it, I advise you to take a look at it. I remember watching it when it was on, and I was hoping to see John Lennon looking lively, and to me, he looked like he was on drugs. I don't know how to put it, but he looked pale, and as a